Imagine walking into a classroom every day, only to be met with looks of doubt and whispers of judgment. That's exactly what 12-year-old Malik faced. A bright, curious boy with a love for numbers, Malik was often dismissed by his teacher, Miss Carter, who saw him as just another average kid from the wrong side of town. She didn't hide her belief that he couldn't possibly measure up to his peers, especially in math, her favorite subject to teach. But what Miss Carter didn't know was that Malik had a secret, a mind like a calculator and a determination that couldn't be ignored. One day, when Malik is put on the spot in front of the entire class, he does something no one, especially Miss Carter, expects. The room falls silent, and in that moment, everything begins to change. Stay tuned to see how Malik turns the tables. The classroom was silent, every eye fixed on Malik as he stood by the whiteboard. Miss Carter's tone had been sharp when she called him up, her expression dripping with skepticism. She'd given him a problem, one of the hardest in the book, a math equation even the top students struggled with. It felt more like a punishment than a challenge, her way of proving her point. Malik's heart raced as he gripped the marker, but his face stayed calm. Numbers came naturally to him. They had always been his escape, his safe place. As he started to write, the class began to murmur. His movements were quick, precise, almost like he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Miss Carter crossed her arms, watching him intently. Was he just guessing? Malik finished writing, turned around, and said confidently, "That's the answer." The room erupted in whispers, but Miss Carter's face was unreadable. Miss Carter slowly stepped closer to the board, her eyes scanning Malik's work. The class fell silent again, holding their breath as they waited for her reaction. She stared at the solution for a moment, then turned to Malik with a raised eyebrow. "Lucky guess," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for him and the class to hear. Malik didn't flinch. He simply walked back to his seat, ignoring the few chuckles that rippled through the room. But inside, his heart sank. No matter what he did, it seemed she was determined not to see him for who he really was. Later that day, during lunch, Malik sat alone, scribbling numbers in his notebook. His best friend, Jamal, joined him, shaking his head. "She's just scared you're better than her favorite students," Jamal said, trying to lift his spirits. Malik didn't respond, but his mind was already racing. He decided he wasn't going to let her doubts define him. Something big was coming. He just didn't know how or when yet. The next week, Miss Carter announced a surprise class competition. She called it the Math Masters Challenge, a series of advanced problems designed to test the brightest students. Malik could feel her eyes on him when she explained the rules. It was as if she was daring him to prove himself again. Her top students, Emily and Josh, grinned with confidence. Everyone knew they were her favorites, the ones she always praised for their talent. Malik, on the other hand, stayed quiet, but inside, his determination burned brighter than ever. When the challenge began, Malik's focus was razor-sharp. Problem after problem appeared on the board, each more difficult than the last. Emily and Josh worked quickly, glancing at each other and smirking. But Malik didn't look up. His pencil moved steadily, his mind working faster than anyone could imagine. As the timer ticked down, Miss Carter noticed something. Malik wasn't just keeping up, he was ahead. The tension in the room grew thick, the air heavy with anticipation. Finally, the last question flashed on the screen, the hardest one yet. All eyes shifted between the three competing students. Malik paused for a moment, his hand hovering over his paper. Would he falter, or would this be the moment everything changed? The room was so silent you could hear the faint scratching of pencils. Malik's eyes darted over the numbers, piecing the problem together in his head like a puzzle. He wrote quickly, his confidence growing, but just as he was about to finish, Miss Carter spoke up. "Time's almost up," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension. Malik's hand froze for a split second. That's when he noticed something. Emily had already put her pencil down, looking smug, and Josh had too. Malik glanced at their papers and saw Miss Carter nodding approvingly at them. It was clear she assumed they had it right. But something felt off. Malik's sharp mind caught a pattern in the problem that wasn't obvious at first glance. He realized that if you rushed through it, you'd miss a crucial step, and it looked like both Emily and Josh had. Malik hesitated. If he corrected it now, he'd stand out even more. Was he ready to face the backlash? He glanced at the clock, seconds ticking away, and made his choice. His pencil flew across the page, finishing the final answer just as the timer buzzed. He looked up, locking eyes with Miss Carter. Her expression wasn't disappointment. It was something else entirely, something he hadn't expected. Miss Carter collected the papers, her expression unreadable as she reviewed each answer. The class buzzed with whispers, everyone wondering who had come out on top. Emily and Josh exchanged confident smiles, certain of their victory. Malik sat quietly, his hands folded on his desk, waiting. When Miss Carter got to his paper, her brows furrowed, and she looked up at him, almost startled. The room fell silent again as she straightened, holding all 3 papers in her hands. "I've reviewed the answers," she said, her voice unusually calm. 2 students made the same mistake in the final problem, missing a critical step. But 1 student caught it and solved it perfectly. Emily and Josh's smiles vanished as Miss Carter slowly turned to Malik. "The winner is Malik." The class erupted in gasps, but Miss Carter wasn't finished. "Malik didn't just solve the final problem," she continued. "His work was flawless throughout the challenge. He's not just good, he's exceptional." But then came the twist. Miss Carter walked over to Malik and placed the paper on his desk. "You've proven me wrong," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "But I think I underestimated more than just your abilities. I owe you an apology." The class was stunned, and so was Malik. For the first time, he saw something new in Miss Carter's eyes. Not just respect, but humility. The moment was bigger than the competition. It was a turning point, not just for Malik, but for how others would see him from then on. The room stayed quiet for a moment, the weight of Miss Carter's words sinking in. Malik looked at the paper in front of him, his name written at the top with a perfect score. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. The classmates who once dismissed him now whispered in awe, and even Emily and Josh couldn't hide their surprise. After class, Miss Carter approached Malik as he packed up his things. "You've taught me something today," she said softly. "Talent isn't always where we expect it to be, and I'll be a better teacher because of you." Malik nodded, unsure how to respond, but he could tell her words were genuine. As Malik walked home that day, the weight of doubt he carried for so long seemed lighter. He had proven that talent has no boundaries, and from that moment on, he knew his potential was limitless.